Hi, Nick. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Kristen?
Pretty good. Pretty good. How's it holding up over there and stay at home?
We are holding up okay here in the nation's capital, where a lot's happening, or some would say not enough. But in terms of my family, we're hanging in there, and we're all doing fine. Thank goodness.
Good. Well, stay that way. Stay fine. And thank you for doing this interview. I know it's been kind of a fun way to get connected with the consultants and expertise kind of going through the pandemic and communicating through COVID-19. So we're really excited to hear from you. I know you've got a lot of insights, especially around this topic, being that crisis is your specialty. I'm sure you've probably been very busy kind of dealing with a lot of these questions, but I'd love to ask you a few more and just get your thoughts for our audience.
Sure, love to.
So initially, I think the first thing that we want to start with is just the trickiness of this situation. The pandemic itself is ever changing. It's really no end in sight. This isn't no crisis is typical, but this is an, especially unusual situation where we're sort of constantly adapting. And I'm curious what your opinion is and what your thoughts are or advice for folks that are constantly needing to adapt their plans, change on the fly. Are there certain aspects that need more attention than others?
Yeah, that's a great question, because a crisis communications plan, is built around scenarios. And what we're seeing with this unfolding situation is it's almost like there are several different chapters to it, right? Different scenarios. So early on, maybe the scenario that you would have planned against if you had it in your plan was, hey, what if something happens at our place of work and somebody gets sick? Of course, many workplaces have already been shut down and are emptied out, and folks are working from home. That's not the case in many others, as we know, grocery stores and restaurants and essential businesses, right? So that scenario then would have changed for a lot of the businesses. So, in that case, what we do is we have a team that is in charge of communicating about that aspect of our operations. Whatever your organization does normally, you're going to have normal communications. But of course, during this time, you're also, especially internally, going to have ongoing communications around this one thing. In terms of updating the plan, I think that there's a good chance that these chapters of the unfolding coronavirus crisis, there are going to be lots more chapters, right? We're still kind of in the early part. Or somebody said we're in the second inning of the baseball game, and so it's certainly not too late to write up those scenarios and plan against them. It could be, hey, what if everything kind of goes, our state reopens, everybody's back in the office, then there's a spike of cases in our area, and we have to then all close down again and work from home again. That's a scenario that a lot of public health experts say is pretty likely actually in the fall. So that's one to plan against if you don't have that. What if we come back to work, everything's fine for a while, and then we have a mini outbreak in our workplace? That's another scenario. So there's still plenty of scenarios to write and plan against, and that work can be done now while we still have time.
Yeah, that's a great point. You've got a lot of change happening both through the pandemic, but also state by state, region by region, and that kind of leads me to another question, which is, how could a crisis communications professional sort of prepare for the next wave of communications, right? So you've got employees in multiple locations. Maybe you're trying to decide how to make it engaging, but also fair and also, correct across the board. What are your thoughts for sort of communicating through that next phase as reopening continues?
Yeah, so reopening is there's enormous internal communications needs there, right? Because all of your team members are going to have questions. They're going to have huge concerns about their own health. They're going to be worried about, look, I feel okay going back, but is it really going to be safe for everybody else who works there? What if we have older or more vulnerable coworkers? People are going to be a little worried about the impact of bringing something back home after all this time of social distancing and and working from home, which a lot of people have been doing. So at the beginning of this coronavirus crisis, I talked about the 3 C's of communicating around this. 3 C's. C for coordination. That is, everything that we communicate, the message should be coordinated with what public health experts are saying. It's not a good time to freelance and try to make stuff off the top of our heads. We should be giving facts that are based on science and based on what the experts are saying. The second one is clarity. Everything we do should be crystal clear, and we should really spend a lot of time making sure that our messages, there's no ambiguity there, right? And that's especially true for internal messages to team members who have a lot of really legitimate concerns about their own health. This is life and death. And also about every little detail about coming back to work, if it's going to be staged, if it's going to be like half the, some places are having phased reopenings where certain employees are coming back first, or some will come in on certain days and not on others, that sort of thing. So all that should be in great detail so that people really understand what you're doing. The third C is for compassion, right? Everything that we communicate should be done with a spirit of understanding what people are going through, which is a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. And if you don't have that as part of your messaging, you're going to lose your internal audience, and all of those messages, those 3 C's also apply to external. One thing that is going to be difficult to do for a lot of national organizations is to coordinate, if they're going to reopen in some places and not others, that could be sort of a fairness issue. It could be seen as sort of like, hey, the folks in California are all still working from home. I have to go to work every day. So those are policies that HR and the C-suite are going to have to work out. When you communicate about them, just, my advice is to, be compassionate, be empathetic, stress like, hey, this is something we're all figuring out. This is a unique situation. We don't have all the answers. We're going to have to do it. We're following this procedure, but we're also going to have to be fluid and flexible as things, happen. And also just to give folks a channel to give some feedback.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I'm going to add another C in there because my question's about this actually. Compliance, right? So you talk about coordination and connecting the dots between what public health professionals and officials are saying and what your organization needs. But talking about compliance across the organization, you have to sort of work with different business units and different areas of the business. Tell me a little about your thoughts on, as you're putting these crisis meetings together, as you're putting a plan or planning for scenarios, how should you be selecting who participates in these meetings? And then, kind of and to piggyback on that, how often should you be having team meetings around this, crisis planning?
Yeah, I think as, when there's a changing situation, I think that the crisis communications team should meet every day. And you could have a daily meeting in the morning just to kind of get on the same page. There should be a lot of coordination with the team, and if everybody's working remotely, that can be difficult to do if you don't have a daily meeting. I think during over the last few weeks, when things have been kind of stable in the sense that a lot of organizations, people have been working from home and there hasn't been imminent change coming, at least in a lot of states, I don't think it necessarily has to be a daily call, but I think the comms team who is focused on coronavirus or COVID communications, maybe 3 times a week, something like that, just to kind of check in and make sure there's, are we listening to our folks? Are we listening to all of our stakeholders? Is there anything we need to communicate to them? I think that's the way that it works best. But when there's an imminent change, like a reopening, return to work, I think it's really important to make sure everybody's on the same page And is it, dotting every T, you dot I's, right? Yeah.
You
So
dot the I's, yeah.
crossing
Crossing the
every
T's.
T, dotting every I, and, just to be thorough, you could also dot every T and cross every I.
True. And work with the team so they can catch those mistakes, right? I mean, that's the
exactly,
important piece of this.
exactly.
Yes. No, and I think that, I've seen that and heard that more and more talking to a lot of communicators that they never had daily meetings before. They never even had weekly meetings before, but now that's happening, more frequently, and they're enjoying it. I mean, there's a lot more meetings on the calendar, but things seem to be, going a little smoother, a little more connected that way since they're not in the same space. So that's good advice. And, I think one of the things that comes out of this is who's actually talking to the media, who is speaking to customers and your external audiences. It seems like more and more during a situation like this, people want to hear from the top. They want to hear from the CEO. Do you have any advice for choosing sort of who that spokesperson should be? Should it be the CEO every time? How do you deal with reluctancies if that, if your leadership is saying, no, I want it to be the expert in this particular business unit, or I want it to be the person, in charge of that region or that area. What are your thoughts on who should be speaking?
Well, that's always a big question, crisis communications. In a typical crisis, we often say that the CEO should definitely be the spokesperson if, the core reputation of the organizations at stake, a really bad reputational risk to the brand. You really want to hear from the top, or if, something very tragic has happened. I mean, a death, God forbid, something like that. That's sort of, it's kind of weird if the CEO, if the head of the organization isn't addressing that. That's what people want to hear. In this case, I think for brands that are consumer facing, it would be odd not to hear from the CEO at all. And in fact, we've seen, airlines putting out videos with the CEO periodically, other companies doing that. I don't think that every communication needs to be the CEO or even should necessarily be the CEO, unless it's a CEO who's really the face of the brand and is very much associated with that brand and is really comfortable doing that. Then I think it could be a really good tactic. I think that when you have a CEO who just really doesn't want to do it, you have to kind of accept that and find some alternative spokesperson. But even in that case, the CEO is going to sometimes have to be the public face.
Yeah, and coming up with other examples is probably a good way to show them that that's kind of the way it's done right now. I've seen a lot of videos that have done particularly well. And I know we just did another interview with Marcus Steele, who does our video, who talks a little bit about that, getting them right up on, comfortable on camera. It's really important piece of it if they're not used to that. So Nick, you mentioned a little bit about what's changing and how to deal and adapt with an ever-changing crisis or this ongoing crisis. But thinking in terms of the traditional crisis plan as we know it, as communicators, are there, things that we should be rethinking now going forward, things that we should start implementing right away, something that you see changing kind of permanently, or to start adding to plans right now, and sort of how to begin that work as we're in the middle of it?
So part of what I'm going to do as a crisis counselor and somebody who teaches crisis communications is to build in a little more of like, what if you really don't know what's happening? How do you communicate around that? How do you tell your employees, hey, we don't know anything. But here's what we need to do in the meantime until we can find out more. Because there's been a lot of that, and a lot of communicators I know have said, hey, we get questions, I just can't answer them, and so we have to find ways to be empathetic and compassionate. And part of that has to be the humility of when you don't know something, you admit it and you lay down the groundwork for, here's the narrative we're going to have once we find out more.
I think that's great advice. And I know this topic is heavy for everyone. This is, this is really important work. Crisis comes. It's stressful. It's around the clock. But I appreciate you giving us some insights. And to end on a happy note, because, talking all of this is so much. what has been one highlight that's come out of a stay-at-home for you? Just kind of being at home with the family. What's your takeaway, your good stuff?
It's like we're all so busy all the time. I travel a lot. The kids are always running around doing their thing. And so we've kind of been forced to, live together and figure out ways to have fun together. And so we've been watching TV as a family every night after dinner a little bit. I've been doing a lot of cooking, and we've been having a lot of great family meals. So in that sense, it's kind of been nice in a way. It is getting a little old. It's getting it's getting a little old, but that has been kind of a highlight for me. And I think, even though they wouldn't admit it, maybe for the kids too.
Yeah, they won't admit it, but that's true. That's true. Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate it, and you stay well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Kristen. Good to talk with you.
Take care. Bye-bye.